The Philippines, a land of over 7,000 islands, where history flows like the tides, shaped by warriors, explorers, and visionaries. A nation born from the confluence of diverse cultures, the clash of empires, and the resilience of its people. For thousands of years, these islands have witnessed the rise and fall of great civilizations. From the seafarers of the ancient world to the rule of mighty sultanates, from the arrival of foreign conquerors to the unbreakable spirit of revolutionaries, every chapter in this story is etched in time. What if we could turn back the pages of history? What if we could stand beside Lapu-Lapu on the shores of Mactan, march with the Katipunan as they rise against oppression, witness the birth of a republic, the devastation of war, and the triumph of a people who never surrender? Today, we embark on a journey through time, unraveling the past that has shaped the modern Philippines, a tale of struggle, of perseverance, and of an enduring hope. This is the entire history of the Philippines. And so, our story begins. Before the arrival of conquerors, before the rise of mighty empires, there were the first settlers, navigators of the seas, pioneers of an untamed land. Their story begins over 60,000 years ago, as the earliest humans arrived on the Philippine archipelago. Who were these first inhabitants? Were they explorers driven by curiosity, survivors seeking refuge, or wanderers in search of new beginnings? We may never know for certain, but what we do know is that they were resourceful, resilient, and deeply connected to the land and sea. The Austronesians, seafarers from Taiwan, began arriving around 4,000 years ago, bringing with them new languages, tools, and traditions. They settled along riverbanks and coastlines, establishing small but thriving communities. These early societies gave rise to what we now recognize as the barangay system, a social structure led by chieftains known as datus. But life was not without its challenges. The islands were a land of both bounty and danger, where nature provided, yet also tested survival. From dense rainforests to towering mountains, from fertile plains to vast open seas, the first Filipinos adapted, innovated, and thrived. And so, the foundations of the Philippine identity were laid. Long before the arrival of foreign powers, before flags and empires, there was a people, free, proud, and deeply connected to the land they called home. Let us journey deeper into their world. As early communities flourished, society began to take shape. The islands were not just scattered settlements. They were structured, organized, and deeply rooted in tradition. And at the heart of it all was the barangay system, the foundation of governance in the pre-colonial Philippines. Led by a datu, each barangay functioned as an independent polity, where alliances were formed, disputes were settled, and the well-being of the people was ensured. Leadership was based on wisdom, bravery, and lineage. The datu was not a ruler in the European sense, but rather a leader who guided, protected, and negotiated for his people. But power was not held by one alone. The datu relied on a council of elders, the Magellan, who advised on laws, traditions, and diplomacy. Justice was delivered through a set of customary laws, passed down through generations. Punishments varied from fines to exile, reinforcing harmony within the community. The social structure extended beyond the ruling class. Below the Magellan were the Timawa, free men who farmed, traded, and fought in battles when needed. At the base of society were the Alipin, a class of dependents who served higher ranks, yet had the possibility of improving their status through hard work and loyalty. These early societies were more than just isolated villages. They were thriving networks of commerce, culture, and leadership. Trade routes connected them to distant lands, where goods, ideas, and traditions flowed like the tides. With a structured society and a growing influence, the island stood ready for the changes that lay ahead. With a well-structured society, the early Filipinos looked beyond their shores. They were not isolated. They were navigators, traders, and diplomats, forging connections across the seas. From as early as the 9th century, seafarers from these islands established trade routes that stretched across Asia. They exchanged gold, pearls, and exquisite textiles for silk, spices, and ceramics from China, India, and the Middle East. Their boats, balangays, were marvels of craftsmanship, enabling swift and efficient voyages across vast distances. This was an age of great exchange, not only of goods, but of ideas. The influence of Hinduism and Buddhism left marks on local belief systems, shaping art, governance, and philosophy. Even before colonization, the Philippines was a cultural crossroads, absorbing and adapting influences from neighboring civilizations. Markets thrived in bustling port towns such as Butuan, Tondo, and Cebu. These were centers of commerce where merchants from different lands mingled, bringing wealth and prosperity. The concept of barter trade dominated, ensuring that transactions were mutually beneficial, guided by trust and reputation. The ancient Filipinos lived by the rhythms of nature, guided by the spirits of the earth, sky, and sea. Their world was one of mystery, shaped by myths, legends, and the unseen forces that governed life. Every island, every valley, every river had a story. The ancestors spoke of Bathala, the supreme deity, creator of all things, watching over the universe. Yet Bathala did not rule alone. His domain was shared with powerful beings, each playing their role in the cosmic order. The people looked to the skies and saw the moon goddess, Mayari, her silver light illuminating the dark. They revered Idianali, the goddess of labor and good deeds, and called upon Amanikabal, the temperamental god of the sea, whose wrath could summon violent storms. But not all spirits were benevolent. The lands were also home to supernatural beings, creatures that lurked in the shadows. The Aswang, a shape-shifting entity of the night, feared by many. The Kapre, a towering giant said to dwell in ancient trees, watching silently from above. And the Tikbalang, the half-man, half-horse trickster, leading travelers astray with its illusions. Stories were not merely entertainment. They were lessons, warnings, and bridges between generations. Elders passed down tales of the Diwata, benevolent nature spirits who rewarded the kind and punished the greedy. The legend of Malachus and Maganda, the first man and woman, spoke of humanity's origin, emerging from a bamboo stalk split open by divine will. These myths, legends, and beliefs wove together the fabric of ancient Filipino spirituality. Even as new faiths took root, the echoes of these stories endured, whispered by the wind, carried by the waves, and preserved in the hearts of those who remember. For in every legend there is truth, and in every myth a glimpse of the soul of a people. Before the arrival of foreign invaders, the islands of the Philippines were not a unified kingdom, but a land of warrior societies. Warfare was an integral part of life, shaping alliances, defining leadership, and safeguarding territories. Tribal conflicts often determined the balance of power. These battles were not fought for conquest, but for honor, survival, and retribution. The weaponry of the time was a reflection of the people's craftsmanship and ingenuity. The kampilan, a long curved sword wielded by the fiercest warriors, known for its deadly precision. The bolo, a multi-purpose blade that doubled as both a tool and a weapon. And the barong, a short, leaf-shaped sword, favored by the Tausug warriors of Mindanao. But weapons alone did not decide battles. It was the warriors who wielded them. Among them stood legendary leaders whose names echoed through history. Lapu-Lapu, the fearless chieftain of Mactan, who defied the Spanish forces and slew Ferdinand Magellan. Datu Kalantiao, known for his strict warrior code that demanded honor and discipline. And Raja Suleiman, who stood against the Spanish invasion of Manila, rallying his forces in defiance. Warfare was more than combat. It was a test of strategy, alliances, and resilience. Battles were fought on land and sea, with swift boats like the Caracoa carrying warriors into naval skirmishes, their speed unmatched by any foreign fleet. Though tribal wars shaped their world, they also prepared the people for the greater battles to come. The struggles against foreign conquerors were yet to unfold, but the warrior spirit had already been forged in the fires of their past. This era of thriving commerce and diplomacy set the stage for future encounters. Encounters that would change the course of Philippine history forever. But what happens when new visitors arrive? Not as traders, but as conquerors. Trade and diplomacy had flourished, but the tides of history were about to shift. Across the seas, new powers were rising, driven by ambition, conquest, and an insatiable hunger for wealth. The winds of change carried more than merchants to the shores of the archipelago. It carried the first whispers of foreign domination. It was the 16th century, when an unfamiliar sight appeared on the horizon. Massive wooden vessels flying the flag of Spain. These were not simple traders, nor emissaries seeking alliances. They were conquistadors, men of war, driven by the thirst for glory, gold, and God. The arrival of Ferdinand Magellan in 1521 marked the beginning of a new chapter, one fraught with both discovery and destruction. As the Spaniards stepped onto these islands, they claimed lands that were not theirs, imposing their ways upon the people who had thrived here for centuries. Before the Spaniards set foot on these shores, Lapu-Lapu was already a name feared and respected across the islands. He was not merely a warrior, he was a ruler, a strategist, and a protector of his people. As the chieftain of Mactan, he led a thriving community, one built on trade, alliances, and the strength of its warriors. The waters around Mactan were both a source of wealth and a battleground. Lapu-Lapu's people engaged in commerce with neighboring islands, exchanging goods, forging relationships, and asserting their independence. But rivalries with other datas were common, and skirmishes between tribes tested the strength of his warriors. Lapu-Lapu was known not just for his courage in battle, but for his wisdom in governance. He understood that power came not only from the blade, but from unity. He forged strong alliances with neighboring warriors, ensuring that Mactan remained free from external control. His rule was marked by a delicate balance of diplomacy and force, ensuring the prosperity and security of his people. The year was 1521. Across the waves, towering galleons flew the banner of Spain, heralding the arrival of a new force, one that sought to claim lands in the name of empire. But what they found on the shores of Mactan was not submission. What they found was resistance. Ferdinand Magellan, a seasoned navigator and explorer, had led his expedition halfway around the world. His fleet had survived tempests, hunger, and treachery, all in the name of discovery and conquest. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. For on the island of Mactan, he faced a leader unlike any other, Lapu-Lapu. Magellan, convinced of Spanish superiority, sought to bring the native chieftains under his rule. He believed his muskets and armor would overwhelm the islanders, who wielded only spears and blades. He underestimated them. As dawn broke over Mactan, Magellan and his men waded ashore, their armor glinting in the morning sun. But the battlefield was not in their favor. The coral-filled shallows slowed their advance, leaving them exposed. And Lapu-Lapu's warriors, swift, agile, and relentless, descended upon them with a fury born of defiance. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, the Spaniards faltered. Muskets were powerful, but they were slow to reload. Crossbows, deadly at range, were useless in the chaotic melee. In contrast, the warriors of Mactan moved like the wind, striking with deadly precision. Then came the final blow. Surrounded, wounded, and unable to retreat, Ferdinand Magellan fell, not to a great army, nor to the might of a European empire, but to the fierce resolve of a people unwilling to kneel. The Battle of Mactan was more than a victory. It was a message that foreign invaders, no matter how powerful, would not find conquest easy in these lands. Lapu-Lapu's defiance became legend, inspiring generations of warriors and leaders who would continue the fight for freedom. But what happened after Magellan's death? His men, battered and letterless, retreated to their ships, their ambitions cut short. Yet, even as they fled, the Spanish Empire had already set its sights on the archipelago. The clash between colonizers and the islanders had only just begun. Lapu-Lapu remained a symbol of defiance. The warriors of Mactan had stood their ground, but they knew the threat had not passed. The struggle for the islands, for identity, and for sovereignty was far from over. The legacy of the Battle of Mactan remains alive today, enshrined in a place of remembrance and reflection. The Mactan Shrine, located in Punta Engano, Lapu-Lapu City, Cebu. This sacred ground stands as a tribute to the first recorded resistance against European colonization. At the heart of the shrine stands the Lapu-Lapu Monument, a towering 6-meter bronze statue of the warrior chieftain. His gaze is unyielding, his stance unwavering, a symbol of defiance and freedom. The monument serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of the Filipino spirit. Not far from Lapu-Lapu's tribute stands the Magellan Monument, an obelisk erected in 1866 by Spanish colonial authorities. Though built in honor of Ferdinand Magellan's role in bringing Christianity to the Philippines, it also stands as a paradox, a marker of both conquest and resistance. Every year, Filipinos gather at the shrine to commemorate Kadaugan sa Mactan, a reenactment of the legendary battle. With vibrant performances and the clash of wooden swords, the past is brought to life, ensuring that the story of Mactan is never forgotten. Beyond the monuments and ceremonies, the shrine serves a greater purpose. It is a place where history breathes, where past and present merge. Visitors walk its grounds, pondering the sacrifices of those who came before. The story of Lapu-Lapu is not merely one of battle, but of identity, sovereignty, and an undying spirit. And so, the flame of resistance endures, not only in stone and steel, but in the hearts of the people. The year was 1521. The sun rose over Mactan, revealing the remnants of a battle that had shaken the course of history. The mighty Spanish fleet, led by Ferdinand Magellan, had been humbled, not by another empire, but by the warriors of Mactan under the command of Lapu-Lapu. Their spears, blades, and unwavering defiance had brought down a legend. Magellan lay dead, and his surviving men retreated, bearing witness to the resilience of the people they had underestimated. Yet, victory on the battlefield was not the end. Though Spain had suffered a crushing defeat, their ambition remained unbroken. Decades later, they would return, not with a lone fleet, but with an empire behind them. Their conquest would no longer rely solely on the sword. It would come with the cross. With the Spanish victory in the archipelago came a transformation unlike any other. The conquest was not only waged through steel and gunpowder, but also through faith. The Spanish crown sought to control not just the land, but the souls of its people. Catholicism became the cornerstone of Spanish rule in the Philippines. Missionaries, backed by the power of the colonial government, spread across the islands, converting barangays and reshaping traditions. Indigenous beliefs, once deeply rooted in daily life, were systematically suppressed, replaced with the doctrines of the Catholic Church. With conversion came subjugation. The natives, now called Indios by their colonizers, were expected to abandon their old ways. Baptism was mandatory. Religious obedience was enforced, and refusal often meant persecution. The friars wielded immense influence, acting not just as spiritual leaders, but as colonial administrators overseeing the lives of the people. Yet faith alone was not enough to maintain control. To sustain their vast empire, Spain imposed forced labor, known as polo y servicio. Men were compelled to work for months on end, building churches, roads, and galleons for the Spanish fleet, often without proper compensation. The people toiled under harsh conditions, their suffering justified by their colonial masters, as a service to God and King. But even in the face of oppression, the people resisted. Secretly, many clung to their ancient traditions, blending them with Catholic rites to preserve their identity. Revolts erupted across the islands, led by those who saw through the illusion of salvation through subjugation. Despite the centuries of forced conversion and colonization, the Filipino spirit endured. While the Spanish crown left its mark, the people would continue to define their own faith, their own identity, and ultimately, their own destiny. Oppression breeds resistance. As Spanish rule tightened its grip over the islands, the flames of defiance began to spread. The Filipino people, long accustomed to their own ways of governance, refused to submit without a fight. From isolated uprisings to full-scale movements, the call for freedom echoed across the archipelago. One of the earliest recorded revolts was led by Raja Suleiman in Manila in 1574, refusing to yield his city to the Spanish invaders. Despite his efforts, Spanish forces overpowered his troops, burning villages and executing resistance leaders. Though his rebellion was crushed, his defiance inspired others to rise up. In the Visayas, Francisco Dagohoy's revolt remains one of the longest in Philippine history, lasting over 85 years from 1744 to 1829. Sparked by an injustice, a priest's refusal to give his brother a Christian burial, Dagohoy led thousands into the mountains, establishing an independent community that resisted Spanish forces for nearly a century. Religious resistance took form in the Tamblot Revolt of 1621, where a native priest led a rebellion in Bohol, seeking to restore indigenous beliefs and reject Catholic imposition. Spanish forces, aided by local allies, violently suppressed the movement. Yet, the dream of reclaiming lost traditions lived on in the hearts of the people. The Diego and Gabriela Silang Rebellion in Ilocos during the 1760s was another defining moment. Diego Silang fought against Spanish oppression, gaining ground through alliances with the British, who were at war with Spain at the time. After his assassination, his wife Gabriela Silang took command, leading the resistance with unmatched courage. She was eventually captured and executed, but her legacy as the first Filipino revolutionary leader continues to inspire. The Polaris Revolt in Pangasinan, 1762 to 1765, erupted in defiance of increased taxation. The revolt initially succeeded, forcing Spanish officials to flee. But in the end, Spanish reinforcements overwhelmed the rebels. The leader, Juan de la Cruz Polaris, was later captured and executed. Yet, the echoes of his defiance carried forward. Despite these revolts, Spanish rule remained strong. Yet, with every uprising, the seeds of revolution took deeper root. The injustices committed by the colonial government fueled a new kind of resistance. By the late 19th century, resistance took on a new form. Education, literature, and unity became the new weapons. The propaganda movement, led by intellectuals such as José Rizal, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Graciano López Jaena, sought reform through words, not war. Their writings exposed Spanish abuses, igniting a national consciousness that could not be silenced. But reform was not enough. The seeds of revolution had been planted. In 1892, Andrés Bonifacio and the Katipunan took up arms, vowing to end Spanish rule once and for all. The Katipunan, a secret society dedicated to independence, spread rapidly, preparing for an all-out revolution. By 1896, the revolution had begun. The first cries of "Kalayaan" rang across the islands. Battles erupted in Cavite, Manila, and beyond. What began as whispers of rebellion had grown into a full-scale revolution. The Philippines stood on the brink of change, one final battle for independence. The fight for freedom had truly begun, and this time, there would be no turning back. By the late 19th century, resistance took on a new form. Education, literature, and unity became the new weapons. The propaganda movement, led by intellectuals such as José Rizal, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Graciano López Jaena, sought reform through words, not war. Their writings exposed Spanish abuses, igniting a national consciousness that could not be silenced. But reform was not enough. The seeds of revolution had been planted. In 1892, Andrés Bonifacio and the Katipunan took up arms, vowing to end Spanish rule once and for all. The Katipunan, a secret society dedicated to independence, spread rapidly, preparing for an all-out revolution. The Katipunan was built upon secrecy and loyalty. Members, known as Katipuneros, swore their allegiance through a ritual involving a blood compact. The society was divided into three ranks: Katapon, new members; Kawal, soldiers; and Bayani, leaders. They communicated in coded messages and conducted meetings in hidden locations to avoid Spanish detection. The revolution quickly turned into an armed conflict, with battles erupting across key provinces. Cavite, the stronghold of the revolution, became the epicenter of the uprising. Led by Emilio Aguinaldo, Filipino forces launched coordinated attacks on Spanish garrisons, securing victories in Imus, Binakayan, and Noveleta. These triumphs solidified Cavite's status as a revolutionary stronghold. In Manila, Bonifacio and his forces attempted to seize the city, launching the Battle of San Juan del Monte in August 1896. However, Spanish reinforcements proved overwhelming, and the Katipuneros were forced to retreat. Despite this setback, uprisings in nearby provinces continued to gain momentum. The revolution spread like wildfire. In Batangas, Laguna, and Bulacan, local revolutionaries engaged in guerrilla warfare, ambushing Spanish patrols and disrupting colonial rule. The battles in these provinces underscored the people's determination to break free from oppression. The victories in Cavite bolstered the morale of the revolutionaries, but Spanish forces soon regrouped. The colonial government sent reinforcements, retaking lost territories and intensifying their crackdown on the rebels. Martial law was declared, and mass arrests and executions followed. José Rizal, the intellectual beacon of reform, was arrested and executed in December 1896, becoming a martyr for the revolutionary cause. His death, rather than silencing the movement, fueled it further, uniting Filipinos in the fight for freedom. But not all was well within the revolution. A rift between Andrés Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo emerged, dividing the revolutionaries. While Bonifacio had founded the Katipunan, Aguinaldo's growing influence in Cavite challenged his leadership. In the Tejeros Convention of 1897, Aguinaldo was elected as the leader of the revolution, while Bonifacio was accused of treason. This internal conflict led to Bonifacio's capture and eventual execution in May 1897. Despite these divisions, the revolution raged on. Aguinaldo and his forces retreated to Biak-na-Bato, where they negotiated a truce with the Spanish in December 1897. Under the Pact of Biak-na-Bato, Aguinaldo and his key leaders agreed to exile in Hong Kong in exchange for financial compensation and supposed Spanish reforms. But peace was temporary. The fight for true independence was far from over. By 1898, with Spain weakened by war with the United States, Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines, bringing weapons and reinforcements. On June 12, 1898, he declared Philippine independence in Kawit, Cavite, raising the first Philippine flag and proclaiming freedom from Spanish rule. Yet, even as Spanish power crumbled, a new force was poised to assert its dominance: the Americans. The fight for freedom had truly begun. By 1898, the tides of war had shifted. The Philippine Revolution had raged for years, and the once mighty Spanish Empire found itself struggling to maintain control. Yet, the fate of the Philippines would not be decided on the battlefield, but in a room across the ocean, in the heart of Europe. The Spanish-American War had changed everything. What began as a conflict between two foreign powers over Cuba extended its reach into the Pacific. In May 1898, American naval forces, led by Commodore George Dewey, arrived at the entrance of Manila Bay, ready to challenge Spain's dwindling hold over the Philippines. As dawn broke on May 1, 1898, Dewey's fleet, a powerful squadron of modern warships, silently advanced toward the Spanish defenses. Opposing them was Admiral Patricio Montojo, commanding an aging Spanish fleet anchored near Cavite. The Spaniards, ill-equipped and outgunned, prepared for what would become a decisive engagement. At precisely 5:40 a.m., Commodore Dewey issued his now famous order: "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley." Almost instantly, the American fleet unleashed a devastating bombardment on the Spanish ships. The battle was swift and brutal. Within hours, the Spanish fleet was reduced to burning wreckage, their forces unable to mount a strong defense. The Spanish sailors fought bravely, but were overwhelmed. By noon, the battle was effectively over. Admiral Montojo's fleet had been destroyed, and the once proud Spanish Navy in the Pacific lay in ruins. Despite the overwhelming victory, only one American sailor was reported killed, highlighting the sheer imbalance in firepower and strategy. The destruction of Spain's fleet at Manila Bay sealed the fate of Spanish rule in the Philippines. Without naval support, Spain's colonial government in Manila was left vulnerable, marking the beginning of the end for more than 3 centuries of Spanish dominance. Yet, for the Filipinos who had long fought for their independence, this was not a war of liberation. It was a change of rulers. As the American flag rose over Manila, the revolutionaries who had battled Spanish forces for years found themselves at a crossroads. Would the Americans be their allies or their next colonizers? Yet, despite the victories on land and sea, the Filipino revolutionaries were not invited to the negotiation table. On December 10, 1898, representatives of Spain and the United States gathered in Paris to negotiate the terms of peace. The result was the Treaty of Paris, a document that would reshape the destiny of the Philippines. Under its terms, Spain agreed to cede the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico to the United States for a sum of $20 million. For the Spanish, it was the end of over 300 years of colonial rule in the Philippines. But for the Filipino people, it was not the independence they had fought and bled for. It was a transition from one foreign ruler to another. The revolution that had begun with the dream of sovereignty now faced a new and unexpected adversary, the United States. The reaction among Filipino leaders was swift and furious. Emilio Aguinaldo, who had declared Philippine independence on June 12, 1898, now found himself at odds with a new colonial force. The Filipino revolutionaries had fought side by side with American forces against the Spanish, only to see their aspirations dismissed by a treaty negotiated without their consent. The Treaty of Paris ignited a new chapter of struggle. Filipinos, unwilling to trade one colonizer for another, stood firm. For the Spanish, it was the end of over 300 years of colonial rule in the Philippines. But for the Filipino people, it was not the independence they had fought and bled for. It was a transition from one foreign ruler to another. The revolution that had begun with the dream of sovereignty now faced a new and unexpected adversary, the United States. By 1899, the embers of war reignited, and the Philippine-American War began. A conflict that would test the resolve of the newly proclaimed First Philippine Republic. The end of Spanish rule did not bring freedom. It brought another war. And so, the fight for true independence was far from over. The Treaty of Paris in 1898 marked the official end of Spanish rule in the Philippines. But it was not the victory the revolutionaries had fought for. Instead of independence, the islands were transferred to a new colonial power, the United States. In early 1899, tensions reached their breaking point. On February 4, 1899, a gunshot rang out near San Juan Bridge, igniting the flames of war. The Philippine-American War had begun. Emilio Aguinaldo, the leader of the newly declared First Philippine Republic, found his forces battling a formidable and well-equipped American military. Filipino troops, many of whom were battle-hardened from their fight against Spain, waged a fierce resistance. Initially, they engaged in traditional warfare, facing the Americans in large-scale battles. However, the overwhelming firepower of the U.S. Army forced them to shift tactics. The war turned into a guerrilla conflict, Filipino revolutionaries using ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, and knowledge of the terrain to counter their technologically superior enemy. One of the war's most devastating battles was the Battle of Tirad Pass in December 1899. The Philippine-American War was in full force. Filipino revolutionaries, outgunned and outnumbered, were retreating further into the northern mountains. But as Emilio Aguinaldo, the leader of the First Philippine Republic, fled toward safety, one man and his men chose to stand their ground: the young General Gregorio del Pilar. At just 24 years old, Del Pilar led 60 Filipino soldiers to hold the strategic Tirad Pass, a narrow mountain trail near Ilocos Sur. This pass was the only route through which the Americans could pursue Aguinaldo, and Del Pilar was determined to delay them at any cost. Facing them was Major Peyton March and 500 American troops, a force nearly 10 times their number. Del Pilar and his men took defensive positions along the steep cliffs, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. From their vantage points, they rained gunfire upon the advancing Americans, forcing them into a grueling uphill battle. For 5 hours, the Filipinos held their ground. Each man fought valiantly, knowing they were vastly outnumbered. The mountain terrain gave them an initial advantage. But as the Americans found an alternate route to flank them, the defenders were slowly overwhelmed. One by one, the brave soldiers fell, refusing to surrender. In the end, General Gregorio del Pilar was among the last to fall. His lifeless body was found near his horse, his face turned towards the sky. The Americans, recognizing his bravery, buried him with military honors. His personal diary, later discovered, contained his final entry, a reflection on duty, sacrifice, and love for his homeland. The general and his men fought bravely, and their heroism will never be forgotten. The Battle of Tirad Pass became known as the Philippine Thermopylae, a testament to the courage and sacrifice of those who fought against overwhelming odds. Though Del Pilar and his men perished, their stand gave Aguinaldo time to evade capture, extending the revolution a little longer. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The names of those who stood at Tirad Pass live on, etched into history as symbols of defiance, patriotism, and unwavering heroism. Their spirits whisper through the mountains, reminding future generations that freedom is never given. It is fought for. But the war was brutal. In the small coastal town of Balangiga, Samar, a tragedy unfolded that would go down as one of the bloodiest confrontations of the Philippine-American War. It was the year 1901, and the American forces had implemented harsh policies to suppress Filipino resistance. The town of Balangiga became a focal point of this growing tension. American soldiers of the 9th U.S. Infantry Regiment, under the command of Company C, occupied Balangiga with orders to pacify the region. The locals, resentful of foreign control, plotted in secrecy. Filipino men, disguised as laborers, and women, concealing weapons beneath their clothes, prepared for an audacious attack. On the morning of September 28, 1901, as the Americans sat for breakfast, the church bell suddenly rang, not as a call to prayer, but as the signal for an uprising. The townspeople swarmed the unsuspecting soldiers, armed with bolos, spears, and captured rifles. Chaos erupted as the Filipinos overwhelmed the garrison. Caught off guard, the Americans suffered heavy losses. Of the original 74 men stationed there, 48 were killed, and several others wounded. It was a staggering blow to U.S. forces, marking one of the worst defeats they had suffered in the war. But victory came at a heavy cost. News of the attack enraged the American military. Retaliation was swift and brutal. Under orders from General Jacob H. Smith, U.S. forces launched a campaign of total destruction. His infamous command, "Kill everyone over 10." The campaign led to the burning of villages, mass killings, and the deaths of thousands of Filipino civilians. The once thriving communities of Samar were left in ruins. The Balangiga massacre remains one of the darkest moments in the war, a stark reminder of the brutality of colonial conflict. Yet, despite the destruction, the spirit of defiance lived on. Decades later, the stolen Balangiga bells, taken by American soldiers as war trophies, became a symbol of unresolved history. After more than a century, they were finally returned to the Philippines in 2018, bringing a sense of closure to a wound that had lingered for generations. By 1902, after years of relentless fighting, the war came to an end. Emilio Aguinaldo was captured in 1901, and with his surrender, the First Philippine Republic collapsed. The United States officially declared victory. but the scars of war remained. The Philippines, now an American colony, faced a new era of governance, education, and resistance. The war may have ended, but the fight for true independence continued. The Filipino spirit, unyielding as ever, would not rest until sovereignty was finally achieved. With the end of the Philippine-American War in 1902, the United States established control over the archipelago, ushering in an era of rapid change. While military occupation and political struggles continued, American rule also brought a new focus on education, infrastructure, and modernization. One of the most significant reforms under American rule was the introduction of a public school system. The Americans believed that education was key to developing loyalty and shaping the future of the Philippines. In 1901, the Philippine Commission created the Department of Public Instruction, and hundreds of American teachers, known as the Thomasites, arrived to establish schools across the islands. In 1901, a new wave of educators set sail from the United States to the Philippines. They arrived aboard the USS Thomas, and from that moment, they would forever be known as the Thomasites, the pioneers of the American public school system in the islands. The mission of the Thomasites was clear: to establish schools, teach English, and instill American ideals of democracy and progress. Over 500 teachers, men and women alike, braved the journey, ready to shape the minds of a new generation. Upon their arrival, they were sent to different provinces, from bustling Manila to remote villages, where they built schools from the ground up. They introduced a structured curriculum emphasizing English, mathematics, science, and civics, replacing the Spanish-influenced education system. The impact of the Thomasites was profound. They laid the foundation for the modern Philippine education system, increasing literacy rates and providing new opportunities for Filipinos of all backgrounds. Many of their students would go on to become leaders, educators, and visionaries who shaped the nation's future. English became the official language of instruction, replacing Spanish as the medium of learning. Schools were built, curricula were standardized, and subjects such as science, mathematics, and civic education were emphasized. Literacy rates began to improve, and for the first time, education was made accessible to more Filipinos. Alongside educational reforms, American rule also introduced sweeping infrastructure projects. Roads, bridges, and railways were constructed to connect distant provinces. The introduction of modern utilities, electricity, telegraphs, and irrigation systems helped urban centers flourish. Manila, the capital, saw significant expansion, with new buildings, government offices, and businesses rising in prominence. Economic changes followed modernization efforts. The United States encouraged the growth of cash crop agriculture, with sugar, coconut, and abaca becoming key exports. While these industries boosted the economy, they also reinforced land ownership inequalities, as wealthy Filipino elites benefited the most from trade opportunities. Despite these advancements, American rule remained controversial. While education and modernization brought opportunities, they also came with cultural shifts, economic dependence, and political struggles. Many Filipinos saw these developments not as progress, but as tools of colonial control. The fight for full independence continued, as nationalist movements grew stronger. The era of American rule transformed the Philippines in profound ways, laying the foundation for modern governance, infrastructure, and education. But with progress came new challenges, and the question of true independence remained unanswered. The world was at war. December 7th, 1941. In the quiet early hours of a Sunday morning, the world changed forever. Japanese warplanes descended upon Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, launching a devastating surprise attack on the United States Pacific Fleet. Battleships burned, aircraft were destroyed, and thousands of lives were lost. America, once hesitant to enter the war, now had no choice. But the attack on Pearl Harbor was only the beginning. Mere hours later, Japanese forces turned their attention to the Philippines, knowing that control of the islands was key to dominating the Pacific. Their first target, Clark Field, the largest American air base in the region. Wave after wave of Japanese bombers rained destruction on Clark Field, catching American and Filipino forces off guard. More than half of the U.S. aircraft stationed there were destroyed before they could even take off. The same fate befell Iba Airfield in Zambales, leaving the skies open for further attacks. On December 9, 1941, Japanese bombers struck Manila, dropping payloads on military installations, communication hubs, and key infrastructure. Panic spread through the capital. Knowing they could not hold the city, General Douglas MacArthur declared Manila an open city on December 26, 1941, in an attempt to spare it from further devastation. The government retreated to Corregidor, but the enemy was closing in fast. As the Japanese advanced southward, Filipino and American forces mounted a desperate defense. In Baguio, the northernmost stronghold, resistance was quickly overrun. In Davao, Japanese landings marked the beginning of brutal control over Mindanao. But the fiercest battle was yet to come. A last stand on the rugged terrain of Bataan and Corregidor, where soldiers would fight not just against an overwhelming enemy, but against starvation, disease, and exhaustion. The fall of Pearl Harbor had set the stage. The Philippines, once a symbol of American strength in Asia, was now a battlefield. And for its people, the nightmare of occupation was only just beginning. For months, Filipino and American forces resisted, enduring hunger, disease, and relentless attacks. The conditions in Bataan were harrowing. Malaria spread rapidly, food supplies dwindled, and soldiers resorted to eating whatever they could find to survive. With reinforcements unable to arrive, the defenders held out as long as they could. April 9, 1942. After months of grueling combat, disease, and starvation, Bataan fell to the Japanese. More than 76,000 soldiers, Filipino and American, were now prisoners of war. What awaited them was not mercy, but one of the most harrowing ordeals in modern history: the Bataan Death March. Forced to march over 100 kilometers from Mariveles, Bataan to Camp O'Donnell in Tarlac, the prisoners were subjected to extreme heat, little food, and brutal treatment. Anyone who collapsed was either shot, bayoneted, or left to die on the roadside. Those too weak to keep up faced the cruelty of their captors, as the march became an agonizing trial of endurance and survival. For 6 days, the prisoners trudged forward, their bodies failing under the scorching sun. Dehydration, heat exhaustion, and dysentery claimed thousands. Some desperate captives attempted to drink from roadside puddles, only to be executed for breaking formation. Others, too weak to stand, were mercilessly beaten. Filipino civilians, horrified by what they saw, risked their lives to provide water and food to the prisoners, sometimes paying with their own lives. Their compassion was met with brutality, as Japanese soldiers executed anyone caught helping. By the time they reached Camp O'Donnell, thousands had perished. Of the 76,000 captives, estimates suggest that anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000 died along the way. Their bodies left unburied along the roadside. Survivors were packed into overcrowded prison camps, where disease and malnutrition continued to claim lives. The Bataan Death March remains one of the darkest chapters of World War II. It was a test of endurance, a tragedy of war, and a symbol of both human cruelty and resilience. Yet, despite the horrors, the Filipino and American soldiers never lost hope. Their sacrifice fueled the fire of resistance, and the fight for liberation was far from over. May 6, 1942. After the fall of Bataan, the last bastion of resistance in the Philippines stood defiant. The island fortress of Corregidor. Positioned at the mouth of Manila Bay, Corregidor was a key strategic stronghold, its network of tunnels and artillery batteries designed to withstand a siege. For months, American and Filipino forces fought desperately against relentless Japanese assaults. Led by General Jonathan Wainwright, the defenders of Corregidor endured a constant barrage of aerial and naval bombardments. Japanese forces, determined to break the last line of resistance, launched over 16,000 shells onto the island, reducing much of its defenses to rubble. Underground, in the Malinta Tunnel, the wounded lay side by side, while commanders plotted their next moves in the flickering light of oil lamps. On May 5, 1942, the final assault began. Under the cover of darkness, Japanese forces landed on the shores of Corregidor, fighting their way up the rocky terrain. Outnumbered and exhausted, American and Filipino troops mounted a fierce counterattack, but the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. Fighting raged across the island as explosions lit up the night sky. By morning, the situation had become dire. With ammunition running low and casualties mounting, Wainwright faced an agonizing decision: continue the hopeless fight or surrender to save his remaining men. At noon on May 6, 1942, he made the heartbreaking choice to surrender. The fall of Corregidor marked the complete occupation of the Philippines by Japanese forces. The defenders of Corregidor had fought valiantly, delaying the Japanese advance and buying crucial time for the Allied war effort. Yet, their sacrifice led to a grim fate. Many of the survivors were sent to prisoner of war camps, where they faced starvation, forced labor, and brutal treatment. Though Corregidor had fallen, the spirit of its defenders never wavered. Their resistance became a symbol of courage, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, the fight for freedom never truly ends. With the fall of Corregidor, the entire archipelago fell under Japanese control. For the next 3 years, the Philippines endured one of the darkest periods in its history. Martial law was imposed, civil liberties were stripped away, and the once thriving cities now lived under the iron grip of an occupying force. The Japanese sought to integrate the Philippines into their vision of an Asian empire, using propaganda, censorship, and coercion to force compliance. Schools, newspapers, and radio broadcasts were flooded with pro-Japanese messages, glorifying the empire and portraying the occupation as a liberation from Western colonial rule. The Filipino people were instructed to learn Japanese customs, language, and songs as part of the cultural indoctrination. Daily life under Japanese rule was marked by hardship and fear. Food supplies were tightly controlled, and rationing led to severe shortages. Cities like Manila and Cebu saw empty markets, and hunger spread rapidly among the population. Farmers were forced to surrender their rice harvests to Japanese authorities, while black markets flourished as desperate families struggled to survive. Curfews were strictly enforced, and arbitrary arrests became common. The Kempei Tai, Japan's feared military police, patrolled the streets, carrying out brutal interrogations and executions of suspected dissidents. Entire villages were massacred in acts of retribution, leaving behind burned homes and grieving families. Women suffered immensely under occupation. Many were abducted and forced into comfort stations, enduring unspeakable atrocities as so-called comfort women for the Japanese military. Fear and silence surrounded these crimes, with victims suffering in secrecy for decades. Hospitals and public health services deteriorated as resources were redirected to the war effort. Medicines became scarce, and diseases like malaria and tuberculosis spread unchecked, claiming thousands of lives. Education was disrupted, with students forced to abandon their studies as schools were repurposed for military use. Despite Japanese control, the Filipino people endured. Families adapted, finding ways to survive amidst the oppression. Some engaged in barter trade, others relocated to rural areas to escape the worst of the occupation. But hope for freedom remained distant as the war dragged on with no end in sight. Despite the overwhelming power of the Japanese military, the Filipino people never stopped resisting. Across the islands, guerrilla groups formed, striking from the mountains, jungles, and hidden strongholds. These resistance fighters, though poorly equipped, waged a relentless campaign of sabotage, intelligence gathering, and direct attacks against the occupiers. One of the most formidable groups was the Hukbalahap, or Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, the People's Army against the Japanese. Led by Luis Taruk, the Hooks operated in central Luzon, launching surprise raids and attacking enemy supply lines. Their influence grew rapidly, drawing thousands of fighters into their ranks. They established a shadow government, collected intelligence, and waged guerrilla warfare that made life difficult for the Japanese occupiers. In Mindanao, guerrilla leader Colonel Wendell Fertig organized local resistance forces, creating an extensive underground network that harassed Japanese positions. Operating from hidden camps deep in the jungle, his fighters conducted ambushes, derailed trains, and provided critical intelligence to Allied forces. Despite being outgunned, Fertig's forces proved invaluable in keeping the Japanese forces occupied and preventing total control over the region. In northern Luzon, guerrilla General Marcos Agustin and Captain Juan Pajota led daring operations against enemy garrisons. Pajota played a key role in the raid at Cabanatuan, helping American forces free hundreds of prisoners of war in 1945. His expertise in ambush tactics and terrain navigation made him one of the most respected guerrilla commanders of the war. Throughout the islands, Filipino civilians acted as secret informants, passing vital intelligence to Allied forces through underground radio transmissions. Even in occupied cities, spies within the Japanese administration leaked critical information that helped resistance forces stay ahead of enemy operations. The network of secret communication became an essential tool for coordinating attacks and preparing for the eventual return of Allied forces. Women played a crucial role in the resistance. Nieves Fernandez, a former school teacher, led a guerrilla unit in Samar, ambushing Japanese patrols with handmade weapons and teaching others the art of silent attacks. Other women served as couriers, medics, and intelligence operatives, ensuring the resistance efforts could continue despite relentless enemy crackdowns. The cost of resistance was high. Japanese forces retaliated with brutal massacres, executing suspected guerrillas and their families. Entire villages were wiped out as punishment for aiding the rebels. Mass arrests, torture, and public executions became common, yet the Filipino resistance refused to break. They fought in the shadows, biding their time for the moment when liberation would finally arrive. Then, in 1944, hope returned. General MacArthur, fulfilling his promise, landed on the shores of Leyte on October 20th, 1944, declaring, "I have returned." The Battle of Leyte Gulf, one of the largest naval battles in history, marked the beginning of the Philippine liberation. American and Filipino troops pushed forward, reclaiming lost territories, city by city, town by town. As the war neared its end, desperation gripped the Japanese forces. Determined to leave no prisoners behind, they carried out one of the most horrifying massacres in the war. On December 14, 1944, in the coastal city of Puerto Princesa, Palawan, Japanese soldiers rounded up 150 American prisoners of war who had been forced into hard labor. These men, weak from months of imprisonment, malnourished, and suffering from disease, had been working on military fortifications for their captors. The prisoners, believing they were being moved to a new camp, were instead ordered into air raid shelters, deep trenches dug into the ground. These trenches, initially built as bomb shelters, had become death pits. The men were packed tightly inside, their bodies pressed against the damp earth, unaware of the horror that awaited them. Then, without warning, Japanese troops poured gasoline over the shelters and set them ablaze. Panic erupted as flames engulfed the shelters. Prisoners desperately clawed at the dirt walls, trying to escape the inferno. Some managed to break free, scrambling out of the burning trenches, only to be met with a hail of gunfire and bayonets. Japanese soldiers, stationed around the perimeter, mercilessly cut down any who attempted to flee. The beach, once serene, became a slaughterhouse. Miraculously, 11 men managed to escape. Through sheer willpower and luck, they evaded their captors, crawling through the thick jungle, hiding in the undergrowth, and wading through the water under the cover of darkness. Some swam across the bay for hours, clinging to driftwood to stay afloat. Their bodies were battered, their minds pushed to the brink of exhaustion, but they refused to surrender to death. Days later, these survivors reached safety and recounted the horrors they had witnessed. Their testimonies spread rapidly, shocking Allied forces and fueling their resolve to bring justice to the perpetrators. The massacre at Palawan became one of the most infamous war crimes committed in the Philippines. Today, the site of this unspeakable tragedy stands as a place of remembrance, the Palawan Massacre Memorial Shrine. Located in Puerto Princesa, this solemn landmark honors the 150 prisoners of war who were brutally executed. It serves as both a reminder of the atrocities of war and a tribute to the resilience of those who perished. The shrine features a mass grave where the remains of the fallen were laid to rest, alongside a monument bearing their names. An eternal flame burns in their memory, ensuring that their sacrifice is never forgotten. Visitors walk through the preserved area, reflecting on the harrowing events that transpired here. Each year, commemorations are held, bringing together families, veterans, and historians to pay their respects. The Palawan Massacre Memorial Shrine stands not only as a site of mourning, but as a symbol of the enduring lessons of history, a warning against the horrors of war, and a call to remember those who gave everything in the name of freedom. The massacre at Palawan was not an isolated event. Similar atrocities occurred across the islands as the Japanese forces, knowing their defeat was near, sought to erase any trace of their crimes. Villages were burned, prisoners were executed, and countless civilians suffered unspeakable fates. Yet, even in the face of such darkness, the spirit of resistance and survival endured. The Allies were coming, and soon the Philippines would be free. But the scars of war and the memories of those lost would never be forgotten. February 3, 1945. The Battle of Manila had begun. What was once the Pearl of the Orient became a battlefield where American forces, Filipino resistance fighters, and Japanese troops clashed in one of the most devastating urban conflicts of World War II. After months of island hopping across the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur's forces reached the gates of Manila. But what they found was a city transformed into a fortress. Japanese troops, under General Tomoyuki Yamashita, had turned every street, building, and bridge into a stronghold. They were ordered to hold the city at all costs, and their last stand would be brutal. For almost a month, Manila became a war zone. The battle raged from street to street, house to house. American tanks rumbled through the boulevards, while Filipino guerrilla fighters ambushed enemy patrols. The Japanese, refusing to surrender, massacred civilians, setting buildings ablaze and turning homes into death traps. The horrors of war consumed the city. The Americans, advancing street by street, encountered fierce Japanese resistance. The battle was unlike any other fought in the Pacific. Every corner of the city had to be taken by force. Flamethrowers were used to flush out enemy strongholds. Artillery rained destruction on fortified buildings, and snipers hid in the ruins, picking off Allied soldiers. The devastation was immense. The worst atrocities took place in Intramuros, the historic heart of Manila. Once a symbol of Spanish colonial power, its churches, universities, and grand buildings became sites of unimaginable horror. Japanese forces, knowing their defeat was inevitable, turned their weapons on the civilian population. Thousands of Filipinos, men, women, and children, were mercilessly executed. Churches that had once offered sanctuary became execution grounds. At San Agustin Church, families seeking refuge were dragged out and slaughtered. At Fort Santiago, prisoners were tortured and shot, their bodies dumped into the river. The once glorious Manila Cathedral, a symbol of faith, was reduced to rubble by relentless shelling. As American forces pushed forward, the battle intensified. Japanese troops, dug into the ruins of Intramuros, fought to the death. Allied artillery bombarded the district, leveling entire blocks to flush out enemy snipers and machine gunners. What had once been Manila's most sacred and historic quarter became a charred graveyard. By February 23, 1945, American forces breached the gates of Intramuros. The last Japanese defenders made their final stand at Fort Santiago, but they were overwhelmed. The battle was over, but the cost was unimaginable. Over 100,000 civilians had perished, and Manila lay in ruins. By February 23, 1945, the Battle of Manila was reaching its final and most decisive moments. After weeks of relentless combat, American forces broke through the remaining Japanese defenses and pressed deeper into the heart of the ruined city. The once grand Manila Hotel, once home to dignitaries, foreign guests, and even General MacArthur himself before the war, now stood as a battered shell of its former self. The capture of Manila Hotel held deep symbolic significance. It was more than just another building. It was a representation of pre-war Manila, a beacon of what once was and what could be again. For General MacArthur, who had lived in the hotel before the war, reclaiming it was a personal and strategic victory. American troops advanced through the devastated structure, clearing out the last remnants of Japanese resistance. Each room, once a place of elegance and luxury, now bore the scars of battle: shattered glass, collapsed ceilings, and the lingering smell of gunpowder. In some corridors, fierce firefights erupted as desperate Japanese defenders launched last-ditch efforts to hold their ground. By nightfall, the battle for Manila Hotel was over. The American flag was raised above its ruins, a declaration that Manila, at last, was returning to Filipino and Allied hands. The war in the Philippines was not yet over, but the capture of this historic landmark marked the nearing end of the city's suffering. With the hotel secured, MacArthur and his men pressed forward, determined to eliminate the last remaining enemy strongholds. Within days, the final battles in Manila would be fought, ensuring that the capital and the nation would once again be free. The nightmare of Japanese occupation was finally over. The city lay in ruins, its people scarred by unimaginable horrors, but the dream of freedom had survived. The war had taken everything: lives, homes, and history. But from the ashes, the Filipino people stood unbroken. On July 4th, 1946, the Philippines finally stood as an independent nation. After centuries of colonization, first under Spain, then under the United States, and the brutal occupation by Japan, the Filipino people had at last reclaimed their sovereignty. The day marked not just a political transition, but the realization of a dream that had been fought for over generations. The event took place at Manila's Independence Grandstand, where representatives from both the United States and the newly established Philippine Republic gathered for the formal ceremony. President Manuel Roxas, a statesman, a survivor of war, and a key figure in the transition from American rule to full sovereignty, Roxas was sworn in as the first president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines. Born on January 1st, 1892, Roxas had long been at the forefront of Philippine politics. A distinguished lawyer and politician, he had served as Speaker of the House, Senate President, and had played a vital role in the drafting of the 1935 Philippine Constitution. His leadership during the war and post-war recovery positioned him as the ideal leader to guide the Philippines into independence. During the ceremony, Roxas stood before thousands of Filipinos, war veterans, and international dignitaries. As the Proclamation of Independence was read, he accepted the responsibility of leading a nation ravaged by war, yet determined to rise anew. But while the moment was celebratory, Roxas was fully aware of the immense challenges ahead. The war had left the Philippines in ruins, its economy shattered, its cities devastated, and its people still reeling from years of hardship. His presidency began under the shadow of American economic influence, as the newly independent nation remained heavily reliant on U.S. aid and agreements. Roxas faced immediate tasks, securing post-war reconstruction funds, reviving the economy, and rebuilding institutions of governance. He implemented the Bell Trade Act, an agreement that granted the U.S. continued economic privileges in exchange for financial assistance. While controversial, it provided the country with much-needed aid to begin its recovery. Despite the difficulties, Roxas set the foundation for an independent government. He established programs for agriculture, industry, and national defense, determined to secure the nation's future. His leadership would be tested by political divisions and the lingering effects of war. But his presidency marked the dawn of the First Republic of the Philippines. With a solemn yet resolute voice, U.S. High Commissioner Paul V. McNutt read the Proclamation of Philippine Independence. In a symbolic gesture, the American flag was lowered, while the Philippine flag was raised high, its golden sun and 3 stars shining brightly in the morning sky. As the final note of the anthem echoed, President Roxas stepped forward and declared the Philippines a free nation. The crowd erupted in jubilation, tears streaming down the faces of war survivors, revolutionaries, and civilians who had endured decades of struggle. For the first time in modern history, the country was no longer under foreign rule. But independence was only the beginning. The nation faced immense challenges. War-torn cities needed rebuilding. A fragile economy required stabilization, and political unity had to be strengthened. The scars of occupation remained, but the Filipino spirit proved indomitable. the people set forth to reclaim not just their land, but their identity as a sovereign republic. As the sun set on July 4th, 1946, the Philippine Republic entered the world stage as an independent nation. The long road to freedom had been arduous, but at last the people stood tall, ready to forge their own destiny. With independence achieved, the Philippines entered a new era of governance, navigating the complexities of nation-building in a world reshaped by the Cold War. As tensions escalated between the United States and the Soviet Union, the Philippines found itself at the crossroads of ideological conflict, tied closely to its former colonizer. In 1947, the Philippines signed the Military Bases Agreement, granting the United States extended control over key military installations, such as Clark Air Base and Subic Bay Naval Base. This agreement cemented American influence in the region, ensuring the Philippines remained a staunch ally against the spread of communism. As the Philippines transitioned into an independent republic, a powerful rebellion threatened to upend the fragile new government. The Hukbalahap Rebellion, led by former anti-Japanese guerrillas, erupted as a fierce struggle for land reform, economic justice, and political power. What had started as a resistance movement against foreign occupation during World War II evolved into a full-scale insurgency against the Philippine government. The Hukbalahap, or Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, People's Army Against Japan, had played a crucial role in resisting the Japanese occupation. After the war, they expected to be recognized as national heroes and given land in return for their sacrifices. Instead, they were marginalized. Many former guerrillas, branded as communists, faced persecution, and their calls for agrarian reform were ignored. Frustrated and betrayed, they turned their weapons on the very government they had once hoped to defend. By 1946, under the leadership of Luis Taruc, the Huks waged guerrilla warfare against the Philippine military and large landowners. Their goal was clear: redistribute land to poor farmers, fight government corruption, and establish a more just society. Armed with captured Japanese weapons and a deep knowledge of the countryside, they launched ambushes, raided government convoys, and built a formidable resistance network across central Luzon. The government, viewing the rebellion as a communist uprising rather than a fight for social justice, responded with brutal counterinsurgency campaigns. President Manuel Roxas declared the Huks outlaws, launching military operations to suppress them. Under President Elpidio Quirino, the conflict escalated as military forces, backed by the United States, sought to dismantle the rebellion with a mix of force and propaganda. By the early 1950s, the tide of the rebellion shifted. President Ramon Magsaysay, a former defense secretary known for his populist approach, initiated reforms that weakened Huk support. He introduced land reform policies, cracked down on corrupt landlords, and launched a psychological campaign to win over the hearts of rural communities. Magsaysay's strategy was not just military, it was social and economic. He provided amnesty to surrendering rebels and sought to integrate them back into society. In 1954, after years of battle, Luis Taruc surrendered, marking the end of the rebellion. Though the Huks had been defeated militarily, the issues they had fought for, land reform, social justice, and economic inequality, remained. Their legacy continued to influence future generations of activists and reformers, shaping the agrarian policies of the Philippines for decades to come. The vast majority of Filipino farmers worked under a tenant system, where wealthy landowners controlled expansive estates, while peasants toiled under harsh conditions with little compensation. Calls for agrarian reform grew louder as the gap between the elite and rural poor widened. In response to growing unrest, President Elpidio Quirino passed the Land Settlement and Development Corporation, La Sedeco, in 1950, aimed at redistributing land to farmers and resettling families in Mindanao. However, the program faced significant challenges. Many landowners resisted the reforms, and corruption hindered its effectiveness. By 1955, under President Ramon Magsaysay, a more aggressive push for land reform took place. Magsaysay, who had gained popularity for his role in suppressing the Huck Rebellion, understood that economic disparity fueled unrest. He introduced the Agricultural Tenancy Act, which provided greater rights to tenant farmers, allowing them to secure fairer contracts and greater protections from abusive landlords. Despite these efforts, land reform remained a slow and challenging process. Large estates, controlled by political elites, continued to dominate the agricultural sector. While legislation provided some relief, enforcement was weak, and many farmers still struggled under unfair conditions. As the Cold War deepened, the Philippines became an essential partner to the U.S. in Southeast Asia. The influence of American political, military, and economic policies shaped its trajectory, reinforcing its role as a democratic stronghold in a divided world. By the late 1960s, the Philippines stood at a crossroads. The promises of post-war democracy had begun to falter, and economic disparity, political corruption, and civil unrest threatened the fragile republic. It was in this climate that Ferdinand Marcos, a young and ambitious politician, rose to power. Before he became one of the most polarizing figures in Philippine history, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos was a young man driven by ambition, intelligence, and a talent for rhetoric. Born on September 11, 1917, in Sarat, Ilocos Norte, Marcos was raised in a politically active family. His father, Mariano Marcos, was a politician, a background that shaped Ferdinand's early exposure to governance and leadership. As a student, Marcos excelled academically. He studied law at the University of the Philippines, where he quickly gained a reputation for his sharp mind and persuasive speaking skills. However, his early years were not without controversy. In 1939, he was convicted for the assassination of Julio Nalundasan, a political rival of his father. While imprisoned, Marcos studied law and even prepared for the Philippine bar exam, where he would achieve one of the highest scores in history. Eventually, his conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court, allowing him to pursue his political aspirations. During World War II, Marcos served in the military and claimed to have led daring guerrilla operations against the Japanese. He asserted that he had earned numerous medals for valor, though these claims would later be questioned by historians. After the war, he used his military service as a foundation for his political career, winning a seat in the House of Representatives in 1949 and later becoming a senator. Elected as president in 1965, Marcos presented himself as a reformist and a strong leader determined to modernize the nation. However, the years that followed would see the Philippines enter one of the most controversial and turbulent periods in its history. Marcos's first term focused on infrastructure projects and economic growth. Roads, bridges, and cultural centers were built, symbolizing progress. However, beneath the surface, political opponents accused his administration of corruption and authoritarian tendencies. By the time he won re-election in 1969, the nation was facing growing instability. Economic downturns, student protests, and a rising communist insurgency. By the early 1970s, the country was in turmoil. The opposition, led by figures such as Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., openly challenged the Marcos regime. In response, Marcos tightened his grip on power. On September 21st, 1972, citing the growing communist threat and the need for national security, he declared martial law under Proclamation Number 1081. Overnight, the democratic Philippines was transformed into a dictatorship. Under martial law, Marcos wielded absolute power. The Constitution was suspended, Congress was dissolved, and press freedoms were crushed. Political rivals were arrested, including Ninoy Aquino, who was imprisoned for years, without trial. The military, now an extension of the regime, cracked down on dissidents, journalists, and activists, leading to widespread human rights violations. Despite the suppression of dissent, Marcos portrayed the era as one of stability and progress. Massive infrastructure projects were launched, the economy saw initial growth, and the Bagong Lipunan, New Society, propaganda campaign sought to rebrand his rule as a golden age of order. However, this stability came at a cost. International debt soared, corruption flourished, and an elite circle, dominated by the Marcos family and their allies, accumulated immense wealth. By the early 1980s, cracks began to show. The Philippine economy was crumbling under massive foreign debt. The communist insurgency had grown stronger, and the people's patience was wearing thin. Then, in 1983, a pivotal event shook the nation: the assassination of Ninoy Aquino upon his return from exile. The opposition galvanized, protests erupted, and the people began to demand an end to the dictatorship. The economy collapsed under staggering debt, and opposition forces, led by figures like Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., grew stronger. When Aquino was assassinated in 1983, public outrage surged, leading to the People Power Revolution. On February 25, 1986, the unthinkable happened. Ferdinand Marcos fled the Philippines, whisked away to Hawaii by U.S. forces. The dictator who had ruled for over 2 decades had been overthrown, not by war, but by the peaceful will of the people. The nation erupted in celebration, yet the road ahead remained uncertain. His departure marked the fall of an era, one that left behind a nation divided, a legacy of grandeur and corruption, and a people forever changed by the weight of history. By February 1986, the Philippine people had reached their breaking point. Years of dictatorship, economic decline, and rampant human rights abuses under Ferdinand Marcos had pushed the nation to the edge. But from this darkness, a beacon of resistance emerged: the People Power Revolution. On February 22, 1986, a historic movement began. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos, young and old, rich and poor, poured into EDSA, Epifanio de los Santos Avenue, standing together in defiance of the dictatorship. The protests were sparked by a fraudulent election where Marcos claimed victory over Corazon Cory Aquino, the widow of the slain opposition leader Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. The people, unwilling to accept another stolen presidency, took to the streets, armed only with prayers, flowers, and an unshakable will for democracy. Born on January 25, 1933, in Tarlac, Philippines, Maria Corazon Cory Cojuangco Aquino was never meant to be a politician. Raised in an influential and wealthy family, she was educated in the United States, studying French and mathematics at Mount St. Vincent College in New York. Her life seemed destined for quiet affluence until fate intervened. In 1954, she married Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., an ambitious journalist turned politician who would become a rising star in Philippine politics. As Ninoy's career soared, Cory took on the role of a supportive wife and mother, raising their 5 children while staying in the background. But history had different plans. When President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in 1972, Ninoy, a vocal critic of the regime, was arrested and imprisoned for 7 years. During his detention, Cory remained a quiet figure, focusing on her family and faith. But in 1980, when Ninoy was allowed to go into exile in the United States for medical treatment, the Aquino family relocated to Boston. For 3 years, they lived in relative peace until August 21st, 1983, when Ninoy returned to Manila and was assassinated on the tarmac of the airport that now bears his name. The assassination of Ninoy Aquino sent shockwaves across the country. Overnight, Cory, who had never sought the political spotlight, became the symbol of resistance against the Marcos dictatorship. Encouraged by opposition groups, she ran against Marcos in the 1986 snap elections, despite having no political experience. As president, Cory faced the colossal task of rebuilding a fractured nation. She dismantled the dictatorship's authoritarian structures, restored democratic institutions, and passed a new 1987 constitution, which limited presidential powers to prevent another Marcos-like rule. She sought to revive the economy, rebuild international relations, and re-establish press freedom. However, her presidency was fraught with challenges. Loyalists of Marcos launched coup attempts, trying to destabilize her government. The economy struggled with foreign debt inherited from the dictatorship. Yet, through it all, Cory remained steadfast, relying on her deep faith and commitment to democracy. After 6 years, Aquino stepped down in 1992, becoming a global icon of democracy. She remained active in social causes, advocating for transparency, education, and justice. Even in her later years, she stood firm against corruption and tyranny, speaking out whenever democracy was threatened. On August 1, 2009, Corazon Aquino passed away, but her legacy of peace, democracy, and resilience lives on. To this day, she is remembered not just as the first female president of the Philippines, but as a woman who, when history called upon her, rose to lead a nation back to freedom. But as the 21st century dawned, the Philippines faced fresh challenges: natural disasters, political scandals, territorial disputes, and the growing influence of digital technology in governance and activism. The modern history of the Philippines is shaped by rapid political shifts, economic challenges, and the continuing search for national identity. Since the restoration of democracy in 1986, the country has seen various leaders with different political visions. However, two figures have particularly influenced recent years: Rodrigo Duterte and Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. Their presidencies have been marked by major policy changes, international controversies, and efforts to redefine the country's place in the world. Rodrigo Duterte, a former mayor of Davao City, was elected as the 16th president of the Philippines in 2016. Running on a platform of strong leadership and crime reduction, he promised to eradicate drugs and corruption. Duterte's most infamous policy was the war on drugs, a nationwide crackdown that led to thousands of extrajudicial killings. His administration claimed it was necessary to combat crime and improve security. But human rights groups and international organizations condemned the campaign, citing widespread abuses. The International Criminal Court, ICC, even launched an investigation into possible crimes against humanity. Unlike his predecessors, Duterte distanced the Philippines from the United States, reducing joint military exercises and questioning long-standing treaties. At the same time, he sought closer ties with China, securing investments and economic deals, despite ongoing territorial disputes in the South China Sea. This policy shift sparked debates over national sovereignty and the country's strategic alliances. Duterte's presidency also faced the global COVID-19 pandemic, which severely affected the Philippine economy. Strict lockdowns were implemented, but criticisms arose regarding the government's slow vaccine rollout and the handling of relief efforts. The economic decline during the pandemic became a major issue in the 2022 elections. In 2022, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, won the presidency in a landslide victory. His election marked the return of the Marcos family to power, decades after the People Power Revolution removed them in 1986. One of the most controversial aspects of Bongbong Marcos's presidency is the debate over historical revisionism. His supporters argue that the Marcos era was a time of progress and economic growth, while critics highlight the human rights abuses and corruption under his father's rule. The Marcos administration has worked to reshape the public narrative through social media campaigns and historical reinterpretations. Marcos Jr. inherited a country still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. His administration has focused on economic recovery, food security, and infrastructure projects. The government aims to attract foreign investments and expand public works projects, many of which were initiated during Duterte's presidency. Unlike Duterte, Marcos Jr. has sought to rebuild relations with the United States while maintaining economic ties with China. However, the South China Sea dispute remains a pressing issue, with increasing tensions between the Philippines and China over territorial waters. Marcos has emphasized diplomatic efforts, but has also strengthened military cooperation with allies. The Philippines faces numerous challenges in the coming years, including economic inequality, environmental threats, and political divisions. As the country moves forward, the legacies of Duterte and Marcos Jr. will continue to shape its political landscape. The question remains, will the Philippines move towards a future of transparency and reform? Or will history repeat itself in new forms? The coming years will define the next chapter of this nation's story. The Philippines, a nation of more than 7,000 islands, lies within the Pacific Ring of Fire and the Typhoon Belt, making it one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. Each year, the country is battered by an average of 20 typhoons, many of them bringing destruction, flooding, and loss of life. Despite this, the Filipino people have shown an incredible ability to rebuild, recover, and rise again. A resilience deeply rooted in the spirit of Bayanihan. Typhoons like Yolanda, Haiyan in 2013, one of the strongest tropical cyclones ever recorded, left catastrophic damage in Leyte and Samar, displacing millions and causing thousands of deaths. The sheer force of the storm wiped out entire communities, leaving behind a landscape of devastation. Other deadly typhoons have also left lasting scars. Typhoon Ondoy, Quetzana, in 2009, brought massive flooding to Metro Manila, submerging homes and streets within hours. The relentless rains caused landslides and swept away entire neighborhoods, highlighting the vulnerability of urban areas to extreme weather. In 2018, Typhoon Ompong, Mangkut, devastated the northern regions of Luzon, triggering deadly landslides and destroying crops that thousands of farmers depended on for their livelihood. The storm surge and extreme winds left entire villages isolated, further emphasizing the need for improved disaster response. One of the most devastating typhoons to hit Cebu in recent history was Typhoon Odette, Rai, in 2021. Packing winds of over 195 kilometers per hour, 121 miles per hour. The storm wreaked havoc on the island, toppling trees, flattening homes, and leaving millions without power and clean water for weeks. The once bustling city was plunged into darkness as emergency responders struggled to restore essential services. The destruction in Cebu was widespread. Entire communities were left without shelter, and access to clean drinking water became a serious crisis. Bridges were washed away, cutting off towns from much-needed relief. But amid the devastation, the spirit of Bayanihan prevailed. Neighbors shared what little resources they had. Volunteers delivered relief goods, and organizations mobilized to provide shelter and medical aid. Government agencies, such as the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, NDRRMC, work alongside international aid organizations to respond to disasters, improving early warning systems and disaster preparedness. However, challenges remain. Climate change continues to make typhoons stronger and more unpredictable, and vulnerable communities often bear the brunt of these calamities. Through each storm, Filipinos have proven that resilience is not just about survival. It is about hope, solidarity, and the unwavering belief that no disaster is too great to overcome. The Bayanihan spirit remains a beacon of strength, ensuring that no matter how fierce the storm, the Filipino heart will always endure. As the Philippines moves forward in the 21st century, the nation stands at the crossroads of rapid progress and enduring challenges. With a growing economy, an evolving political landscape, and increasing global integration, the country continues to shape its destiny. The economy, once fragile, has shown significant growth over the past decades, driven by industries such as business process outsourcing, BPO, remittances from overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, tourism, and the rise of digital entrepreneurship. Cities like Metro Manila, Cebu, and Davao have become economic hubs, attracting investors and creating new opportunities for millions. However, despite economic growth, inequality remains a pressing issue. Many rural communities continue to struggle with poverty, and access to quality education and healthcare remains uneven. Infrastructure improvements, while ongoing, must continue to address the needs of a growing population. The gap between urban prosperity and rural hardship remains a defining challenge. Politically, the nation has seen shifts in leadership, with each administration bringing new policies and priorities. Democracy, once fragile after the fall of dictatorship, has endured, though challenges such as corruption, political dynasties, and misinformation in the digital age pose significant concerns. One of the most urgent issues facing the Philippines today is climate change. As an archipelago, the country is highly vulnerable to rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and environmental degradation. Efforts to invest in sustainable energy, disaster preparedness, and climate resilience are crucial to safeguarding future generations. Yet, through all these challenges, the Filipino spirit remains unbreakable. Whether through Bayanihan, innovation, or sheer determination, the people of the Philippines continue to adapt, thrive, and push forward. With a young and dynamic population, a rich cultural heritage, and an ever-evolving global presence, the Philippines stands poised to write the next chapter of its history. From the earliest civilizations to the modern era, the Philippines has endured cycles of conquest, revolution, and transformation. Through war and peace, colonization and independence, dictatorship and democracy, the Filipino people have proven time and time again that they are a nation of resilience, courage, and unity. Their past is a testament to their unyielding spirit, and their future remains unwritten, full of promise and potential. The story of the Philippines is one of survival and reinvention. It is a tale of a people who have faced adversity head-on, forging their destiny despite the odds. The triumphs and struggles of the past serve as guiding lights, reminding future generations of the sacrifices made and the victories won. From the shores of Mactan, where Lapu-Lapu stood defiant, to the halls of revolution, where heroes like Rizal and Bonifacio dreamed of freedom. The Filipino journey has been one of perseverance and strength. Today, as the nation moves forward, it carries the weight of its history, while embracing the promise of tomorrow. The challenges remain: economic inequality, climate change, political shifts. But so does the spirit of Bayanihan, the unwavering determination to build a brighter future. The Filipino identity is not just defined by its struggles, but by the unity and compassion that bind its people together. In every crisis, Filipinos rise, not alone, but together. As the Philippines steps into the future, it carries with it the lessons of the past. It is a nation shaped by history, strengthened by its people, and guided by an unbreakable spirit. The world continues to change, but one truth remains: the Filipino heart will always endure. It beats with the strength of warriors, the wisdom of leaders, and the hope of dreamers. To all the historians, researchers, and passionate seekers of the past, this journey through the history of the Philippines would not have been possible without the tireless efforts of those dedicated to preserving the truth. History is more than the recounting of events. It is the thread that weaves the identity of a people, shaping their present and guiding their future. To every historian who has devoted time to uncovering forgotten stories, to every archivist who has safeguarded documents, and to every teacher who has inspired curiosity in the next generation, this is for you. Your work ensures that the echoes of the past do not fade, that the lessons of history remain clear, and that the voices of those who came before us are never silenced. To the viewers who have followed this tale with an eager mind and an open heart, you too are part of this legacy. By engaging with history, by questioning, learning, and sharing, you breathe life into the past and ensure that knowledge is never lost. Let us continue this journey together. For every forgotten name, for every hidden story, and for every lesson yet to be uncovered, may we always seek, always remember, and always honor the past. And so, dear travelers of time, our journey through history has come to an end, at least for now. But the adventure never truly stops. If you have enjoyed this tale and wish to uncover even more stories from the past, then I invite you to become a part of the Timeless Tales community. By clicking the Join button below, you can become a member of Timeless Tales, gaining exclusive access to behind-the-scenes content, early video releases, and special member-only discussions where we delve deeper into the mysteries of history. Your membership supports the creation of more timeless adventures and ensures that history remains alive for generations to come. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another journey through the echoes of time. Your support helps keep these tales alive, ensuring that history remains a vivid and captivating adventure for all. And for those who wish to wear their love for history proudly, explore our brand new Timeless Tales merchandise shop, linked below. From artifacts of the past to symbols of discovery, you'll find something to accompany you on your own historical quests. Thank you for being part of this grand adventure. Until our next journey, keep questioning, keep exploring, and above all, stay timeless.